The United States is known as being a force. They've never lost a war in the history, except for that one time Canada burned down their White House. Thanks for watching Informal History. My name is Adam, and the story of the White House being burned by Canada is especially interesting to me, and let's start off with how it all began, which actually takes place in my own backyard. The War of 1812 was a conflict between Britain and the United States from 1812 to 1815. The War of 1812 was also the entire personality of every headline and every newspaper from 2012 to 2015 here in the Niagara region, and I'm sick of talking about it, but it's an interesting story. And the War of 1812 was really the only one that the US started and didn't win. In the 1800s, America was on a quest to expand west. This could easily be a 35-part series, and in fact, I actually did the Donner Party episode, which is right here, which is people from the east trying to get to the west. But what stood in their way a lot of the time were Native Americans, people who were there before them, and they were essentially taking over the land that belonged to these Native Americans, and they would put up a fight. But how would they fight Americans? Well, they got help. Americans suspected Britain, which also had a colony just north of the US, called British North America, Upper Canada, Lower Canada, present-day Canada, and they suspected that they were helping the Native Americans fight against the Americans actually showing up and taking their land. In true US fashion, this irritated them. They became very irate and decided, let's start a war and start becoming violent in order to take this part of the landmass that we deem to be ours. Now keep in mind, this is a very simplified version. The War of 1812 is absolutely a robust topic that we could go on about for an entire series, but let's just break it down into a 10-minute video. On top of this, American seamen were in prison, Britain was interfering with trade, and the US had a bit of a fetish for taking land, and they wanted what is now Canada for themselves as well. Now again, Canada was not actually Canada until 1867, and this happened 50 plus years before that. So at the time, Quebec was Upper Canada, what is now Ontario was Lower Canada, just as a quick reference for the history that you didn't learn about Canada in school. And Canada was known as British North America, although I'll call it Canada for the rest of the video, and it was a territory of Great Britain. And Canada itself, even being called Canada sometimes at this time, was a fragmented nation. They were considering themselves a nation. Everybody came over the Atlantic and now they're settling in this brand new place, and it was fragmented. They didn't really see themselves as congealed or a society yet. It was something that was a little bit too new. So this new war defending themselves against the Americans was Canada's first real Canadian act where everybody had to join forces together and defend their now native land. Kind of a unification and a new sense of actual nationhood. Fast forward to June of 1813. This is when Laura Secord heard of an impending attack from the Americans on what is now Canada. She knew that they were going to be coming across the Niagara River, which is the river that Niagara Falls pours into and separates modern-day Canada from the US. She knew this attack was impending, she knew it was going to happen now, and she had to do something. She knew the right person to talk to for the job was Lieutenant FitzGibbon. Lieutenant FitzGibbon could be found not that far away, at the John DeQ house. The problem was Laura Secord's homestead was in Queenston, Ontario. Queenston is modern-day Niagara Falls, very close to where the falls actually are. She had to make her way over 32 kilometers through swamps, brush, prairie. No matter where she went, there is no trail, there are no roads, and as she's traversing these streams and bogs and ponds, she's wearing nothing but flip-flops. The Niagara region has nothing but streams separating every which way. Laura Secord had to swim across some of these, and she finally found her way at the John DeQ house, the residence of a man who did much for Niagara, including being a founding member of the Welland Canal Company, the canal that now joins Lake Ontario to Lake Erie, and that's the reason billions of dollars of trade is possible in the region. By the time Laura Secord got to the John DeQ house, she had time because the Americans were stalled by 2 full days, allowing Lieutenant FitzGibbon to mobilize a defense and repel the attack by the Americans. Laura Secord now is a heroine of Canada and a giant inspiration around here. Schools named after her and a chocolatier as well. Bridges like this one were erected in her memory as her footsteps were exactly right here underneath us right now. I wanted to do this video in the winter winter, which is why all the B-roll of this house is covered in snow, but this is the actual plot of land where Laura Secord walked to. This is Sir John de Qu's house, or the remains of it, because it did burn down earlier in the last century. I wanted to be at the John de Q house to do this, but they were mowing the lawn yesterday when I was filming, and it was too loud and noisy. Now, Canada's a bit upset at this point and decides to go on the offensive. This coupled with the April attack of York, now Toronto, which at the time was the capital. Believe it or not, Toronto is not the capital of Canada. Ottawa, Ontario is, and it's right here. And this had Canada retaliate, and eventually on August 24th, 1814, launching attacks on Washington. British forces were fresh from victories in Europe following the defeat of Napoleon, and they turned their attention to North America. In August, a British expeditionary force under the command of Rear Admiral George Cockburn, spelled like this but pronounced Cockburn, and Major General Robert Ross sailed up the Chesapeake Bay towards Washington, D.C. As we've seen before rather recently, the American capital was ill-prepared for what is a siege. That's what was trying to be done. Keep in mind, the U.S. tried to take Canada's capital. Canada said, nuh-uh, I don't think so. We're going to take your capital. And when they got into Washington, D.C., they really just had the lay of the land to do whatever they wanted. British forces advanced, and President James Madison and other government officials quickly and efficiently evacuated the city. They left behind basically a token defense force that they knew really wasn't going to do anything, but they just didn't want to lay down and let Canada, or Britain at the time, do whatever they wanted. But they did, because British troops, including British troops from Lower Canada, marched right in and started setting fire to a bunch of the buildings, including the Capitol building, which apparently still doesn't have that good of defense, and the White House. This seems insane today. Can you imagine reading a headline saying the White House is being burned, the White House is on fire? That would never happen. And if it did, whoever did it would feel the full wrath of the greatest military to ever exist. But this was a much different time, and a rude awakening, an eye-opener to the US, thinking, well, we are a pretty new nation. I can't believe this is happening to us, but it definitely did. And again, Canadian units, including militia and regular troops from British North America, played a huge role in the British expedition. And they fought alongside British forces in engagements leading up to the burning of Washington, including the capture of Fort George and battles in Upper and Lower Canada. So if you want to see me do a full episode on the War of 1812, including Fort George, which is basically in my backyard, and Fort Mississauga, which is actually the most haunted place in all of Canada, but played a crucial part in the War of 1812 and the defense against the US. And also there's a part there where you can literally read War of 1812 soldiers writing in the brick that is etched there to this day. You can still see that, which is kind of cool. Let me know in the comments section below. Is this a good topic? Do you want to see more about this interesting war that you probably didn't know about? And as always, please hit subscribe. And because we do videos every weekend, that means I'll see you in the next one.